Let's go to Canberra now and see if the Deputy Liberal Leader is ready. Yeah, she is now. Sussan Ley. Sussan Ley, good morning to you. Just on these, the fallout from yesterday, the government was undermined. This, according to the Solicitor General. Does Scott Morrison need to apologise to the Australian public?
Pete, you're describing it as fallout. I'm describing it as a bewildering example of the Albanese Cabinet meeting and spending their time talking about this issue. I would have expected they would come bursting out of that cabinet room full of ideas for the Australian people to lower their power prices and address their broken promise, to look at the cost of their mortgage going up next month and feel their pain, and to be concerned about grocery prices. But instead, they seem to have sat at that table, a table that I have sat at over many years, genuinely concerned for the future of Australian small businesses, families, and our futures. And they've decided to yet again stand up and talk about this. Well,
I mean, the federal government, our institution, was undermined here, though. It needs to be explored further. Back to the question, does Scott Morrison need to apologise to the Australian public, the people?
I don't give my colleagues gratuitous advice about this or any other matter, particularly not over the airwaves, Pete. But what I do note is that the Solicitor General said the appointments were validly made and did express concerns, and there are issues to consider. And what we have said as an opposition is that we will join with the government in considering any reasonable proposals that they put forward.
So you will cooperate?
Well, we've already said that we will consider any reasonable proposals that they put forward that lead on from the Solicitor General's advice. Peter Dutton's made that clear. I've made that clear.
Malcolm Turnbull has said this morning that any review needs to go, or bigger inquiry needs to go beyond Scott Morrison. He has singled out PMO, PMC, the GG's official secretary. He says if they didn't push back, the system has failed. Do you agree with that?
I don't agree that the entire system has failed. I believe that in considering the matter carefully, a person of the quality of the Solicitor General and his 30-page report has provided the information that Mr Albanese has picked up and decided to talk about yet more inquiries. Now, that's a matter for the government, and all of this conjecture and political commentary is a matter for the people making it. But it's not a matter for me, Pete, and it's not a matter for the opposition beyond that statement that, yes, we will consider reasonable proposals and, of course, cooperate with the discussion, because what we're focused on is the rising cost of living, is the squeeze that many families are under. And as Peter Dutton takes the shadow cabinet around the country, we're seeing that very real, very up close, and we as a team want to work for, support and propose policies that actually look after our people and help them with their future and support them in the face of the economic headwinds that this country is facing. But we get nothing from the government. We just get, day after day, the rearview mirror, events of 2020, events of 2021, and, you know, a constant diatribe and narrative about the past. What about the future?
Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard, Bill Shorten, they were all called before a royal commission. Is this a form of payback, do you think?
Well, if it is, it's very concerning, because payback within the Canberra bubble, within this building, within all of the issues that the average Australian just doesn't relate to and doesn't care about, is taking away from what should be the government's priorities. Now, they're here in Canberra next week for another talk fest, and Anthony Albanese will stand up with a lineup of his ministers, and they'll make more, they'll talk more about their so-called jobs summit, even though the outcomes are pretty much already decided. I'll tell you where I'll be, Pete. I'll be in Lismore, joined by Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor, meeting with Kevin Hogan and the people who have struggled through the floods earlier this year. And what I want to know is why Anthony Albanese hasn't been to Lismore since the election. He was happy to stand up there and use it as a backdrop for political commentary in the election campaign. He's found time to go overseas, to go on holiday, to go to the Torres Strait, to chat with rappers on FM radio, to go to rock concerts. but he hasn't had time to go to Lismore and sit with the people who are struggling, the people who are hurting. And the report that came through just a couple of weeks ago and the appeal followed that from Kevin Hogan. The Premier's been up there. People in New South Wales are listening. People in the government in Canberra don't seem to be.
But I mean, if you're going to point out Lismore, your government was slow to react initially, whether it was Defence Force or calling it a national emergency or a natural disaster.
But what we did was put in place some really powerful emergency measures that got those communities through. But as you and I know, Pete, it's the long term that counts. It's the next steps that matter. And that's what the report that has been given to the Premier of New South Wales has indicated. And there's actions that come out of that report. There's consideration that needs to happen. There's help that needs to come from the Albanese government. Mr Albanese talked a big game during the election campaign about what Lismore and those floods meant. I don't want to politicise those floods and certainly not do what I believe he did, which was to use those communities as a political football. What we want to do is find out how we can help, to listen, to understand and to support those vital next steps.
OK, well, I mean, if you're going to attack the Prime Minister on apparently going missing on that point, I mean, you've been very visible this week. Where's the Opposition Leader?
Doing what all of our shadow cabinet team is doing, out there with communities, supporting the initiatives that they're bringing forward, factoring in policies, talking about our really good policy that gets skills into businesses immediately, which is a doubling of the pension and veterans work bonus, something that the government could implement now. They're sort of hinting that they're going to do it after the skills summit, maybe some big reveal. They could have done it weeks ago. Businesses are crying out for that sort of help. And we know that it's something that we proposed. We don't mind the government picking it off the table. They need to get on with that. And by the way, many other measures that support those businesses that need help when it comes to increasing power prices, lack of workforce and supply chains that are disrupted.
Right, so that speech that you gave the Chamber of Commerce last night, is this you getting ahead of the Job Summit, which, as we know, you're not going to?
Well, it's a talk fest. There's no need to get ahead of it. I mean, I completely believe that all of the outcomes that will be announced soon after have already gone through the Expenditure Review Committee of Cabinet and they've already been worked through. And that's why it's insulting to the families and small businesses that could benefit from them that they've had to wait weeks, if not months, to actually get those policies to help them. So we know that this is a job summit that looks after the unions, where the priorities will be what the CFMEU wants, what the ACTU wants, what the MUA wants.
Right, but business groups will be there too.
Sorry, Pete, I didn't catch that.
Business groups will be there too.
And they should be there in good faith. They should be there in good faith. And the government should have every chance to get things right. However, what I'm seeing is a government that is putting on yet more political theatrics. When they don't need a talk fest, they need the actions that could come out of sensible cabinet processes that would actually deliver for the Australian people, for families and manufacturing businesses. And I'm sure that you've had many on your program that have told you how much they are hurting and how much anxiety they feel for the future. Level of deteriorating confidence is of real concern. No,
that is one of the big issues that we've been talking about this week is the topic of migration. There's a lot of people who have different views on whether a big increase is actually needed. What's your take on migration levels? If it's too high, are you concerned that that will lead to flow-on effects, i.e. when it comes to housing? We know that there's already not enough as it is. What are problems that you've identified with a too bigger increase in migration?
There is a balance to be struck there, but our pensioner and work bonus proposal actually activates an existing Australian workforce. They could be in hospitality businesses, in aged care, in retail tomorrow if the government had picked this up. It's a ready workforce waiting to do this. Yes, migration and some congestion busting in the visa approvals process is needed. But also in addressing the skills needs of the economy, the government needs to look at how every provider of skilling can be supported. Not just TAFE is important, but we've got a huge industry-led sector that also provides private training that could support apprentices and trainees, something we started in government with bigger than ever incentives and therefore more apprentices starting than ever before. But we actually need this to be done with industry and businesses at the centre, not the unions dictating terms.
Was it a mistake in hindsight to cut nearly $1 billion from visa processing in the Home Affairs Department?
Look, those judgments will be made, and I think what matters is that the government responds to the circumstances of today. So the circumstances have dramatically changed in the last few months as the borders have opened up, but we found that people are actually not coming to Australia because they've got other choices they can make as, if you like, an imported workforce. They can go to the US, they can go to Canada, they can go to Europe, they can go to New Zealand. Maybe what the government could consider is a campaign that attracts them to Australia and says, we know that you've got lots of places you can go, but this is what will make a difference to you and your family if you come here. But if they're only starting this conversation, Pete, it's going to take a long time before it turns into a real policy in the real world of real help to businesses.
Sussan Ley, the Deputy Opposition Leader, thank you for your time. We'll talk to you soon.